The disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. Authorities are now focusing tonight on two central pieces of evidence, including what could be that crucial DNA found in Nancy Guthrie.
What if the most talked about mystery surrounding Nancy Guthrie was never really a mystery at all? What if the confusion, the rumors, the wild theories, all of it, came not from hidden secrets or buried evidence, but from something far simpler and far more human? Here is the truth. Most people who have heard of Nancy Guthrie think they understand her story. They have pieced it together from fragments, a headline here, a comment thread there, a second-hand account passed from one person to the next. And in doing so, they have built a picture that looks real, feels real, but is missing the most important pieces. Today, that changes. In this video, we're going to go through everything: who Nancy Guthrie really is, what people got wrong, why they got it wrong, and what the full, accurate human story actually looks like when you strip away the noise. This is not speculation. This is not another theory to add to the pile. This is a careful, honest, detailed examination of a story that has been misunderstood for far too long. Stay with me from beginning to end, because the truth is not what you think, and once you see it clearly, you will not be able to unsee it. Before we can solve any mystery, we have to understand who we are actually talking about. And in the case of Nancy Guthrie, that understanding has been surprisingly rare. Nancy Guthrie is a Christian author, speaker, and Bible teacher based in Nashville, Tennessee. She has written more than a dozen books, led thousands of people through grief and scripture, and built a ministry that has touched lives across the world. She is co-host of the podcast, Help Me Teach the Bible, alongside her husband David. And she founded Respite Retreats, a ministry specifically designed to support couples who have experienced the death of a child. That detail matters enormously, and here is why. Nancy and David Guthrie lost not one, but two children to a rare metabolic disorder called Zellweger syndrome. Their daughter Hope lived for 199 days. Their son Gabriel lived for 183 days. Both children were born with a condition that made survival beyond infancy impossible. Nancy did not hide this grief. She did not bury it. She walked into it openly, publicly, and with extraordinary faith, and she wrote about it in books like Holding On to Hope and Hearing Jesus Speak Into Your Sorrow. This is the real Nancy Guthrie, not a figure wrapped in criminal mystery, not a subject of a disappearance case. A woman who experienced devastating, repeated loss and chose to let that loss become the foundation of a ministry dedicated to helping others survive their own. So why has her name been attached to mystery, confusion, and unanswered questions? That is exactly what we need to examine. The internet is a powerful tool for connecting people with information. It is also a powerful tool for spreading misinformation at extraordinary speed. When people search for Nancy Guthrie's name, they encounter a range of content, articles about her books, interviews about her faith journey, podcast episodes, and Bible study resources. But they also encounter something else: vague, poorly sourced content that frames her story as a mystery, as something unsolved, as something darker than it actually is. How did that happen? The answer lies in a combination of factors that are entirely familiar to anyone who has studied how online narratives form and spread. First, there is the issue of emotional gravity. Nancy's story involves the death of two children. That kind of tragedy naturally draws attention. People feel deeply when they hear it. And when people feel deeply, they engage, they share, they comment, they search for more. That emotional engagement is not wrong, but it creates a kind of gravitational pull around the story that can attract speculation and sensationalism alongside genuine interest. Second, there is the issue of incomplete information. Not everyone who encounters Nancy's name starts with full context. Many people hear fragments. She lost two children. There is a disorder called Zellweger syndrome. Her story has captivated thousands, and they begin filling in the blanks with assumptions. Human beings are pattern completion machines. When we do not have the full picture, our minds reach for something to fill the gaps. And in the absence of facts, imagination rushes in. Third, there is a category of content online that deliberately frames straightforward stories as unsolved mysteries. This type of content uses dramatic language, rhetorical questions, and cliffhanger structures to manufacture suspense around stories that are, in reality, fully documented and well understood. Nancy Guthrie's story became a target for this kind of content, not because her story is actually mysterious, but because the emotional weight of it makes for compelling framing. The result was a slow accumulation of confusion. People who had never read her books, never heard her speak, never listened to her podcast began to form ideas about who she was that bore little resemblance to reality. And those ideas, once formed, were hard to dislodge. Let us look at some of the specific misconceptions that developed around Nancy's story, because understanding what went wrong is essential to understanding what is actually true. Misconception 1. That her story involves unresolved tragedy with no explanation. Some accounts framed the deaths of Hope and Gabriel as mysterious or unexplained, as if the cause were unknown or concealed. This is simply false. Zellweger syndrome is a real, documented, medically understood condition. It is caused by mutations in genes responsible for the formation of peroxisomes, cellular structures essential for normal development. Children born with the most severe form of the syndrome, as both Hope and Gabriel were, face profound neurological and physical challenges and rarely survive beyond the first year of life. This is not a mystery. It is a tragedy rooted in genetics, fully documented in medical literature, and openly discussed by Nancy and David Guthrie in interviews, books, and public speaking engagements for over 2 decades. Misconception 2. That Nancy's public ministry was a response to something she was hiding. Some speculation suggested that Nancy's sudden rise to prominence as a speaker and author was somehow connected to concealment, as if the platform she built was a way of controlling a narrative. This is both unfair and inaccurate. Nancy began writing and speaking because she genuinely could not find resources that helped her grieve as a Christian. She has said this herself in dozens of interviews. She wrote the book she needed to read and could not find. Her ministry grew because her honesty resonated with people who were experiencing their own losses and had nowhere to turn. That is not concealment. That is courage. Misconception 3. That key facts about her story have been withheld. This misconception is perhaps the most persistent, and it is the one most directly fueled by the type of online content that frames her story as a mystery. The reality is that Nancy Guthrie is one of the most open, transparent public figures in her field. She has discussed her children's deaths in extraordinary detail. She has written about her emotions, her doubts, her faith struggles, and her recovery with a level of honesty that many authors never approach. Nothing has been withheld. If anything, the problem has been the opposite. Her openness has been so complete that it leaves little room for the kind of dramatic gaps that mystery-style content depends on. So that content manufactures the gaps instead of acknowledging they do not exist. To truly understand Nancy Guthrie's story, you have to understand what Zellweger syndrome actually is and what it means for a family to live through it twice. Zellweger syndrome belongs to a group of conditions called peroxisome biogenesis disorders. In healthy cells, peroxisomes play a crucial role in processing fatty acids and producing the building blocks of certain brain structures. When the genes responsible for peroxisome formation are mutated, development goes catastrophically wrong. Infants with the most severe form are typically born with seizures, profound hypotonia, which means extremely low muscle tone, hearing and vision problems, and a range of neurological complications. Most do not live past 6 months. A few survive to a year or slightly beyond. The Guthries learned about this condition when their daughter Hope was diagnosed shortly after birth in 1998. Nancy has described the months that followed as a period of grief that began before Hope died, a kind of anticipatory mourning that is uniquely brutal because you are loving someone with your whole heart while simultaneously preparing to lose them. Hope died in August 1998. What makes the Guthrie story even more remarkable and even more heartbreaking is what came next. Nancy and David were told by doctors that their next pregnancy had a 25% chance of producing another child with Zellweger syndrome. They chose to try again. Their son Gabriel was born in 2001, was diagnosed with the same condition, and died in September of that year at 6 months old. This decision, to try again knowing the risk, is one that Nancy has discussed with extraordinary candor. She has not presented it as heroic or as something everyone should do. She has presented it as deeply personal, shaped by faith, and made in full awareness of the cost. The willingness to speak about this level of vulnerability is, frankly, rare. It is one of the reasons her books have sold hundreds of thousands of copies and why her speaking engagements fill rooms. There is no mystery here. There is only a woman who endured something almost unbearable twice and decided that the most faithful response was to be honest about it in the hope that her honesty would help someone else survive their own unbearable thing. Following the deaths of Hope and Gabriel, Nancy Guthrie did not retreat. She wrote. Her first book, Holding On to Hope, was published in 2002. It is a reflection on the book of Job, the biblical account of a man who suffers catastrophic loss and wrestles with God in the aftermath. Nancy's reading of Job is personal and unsentimental. She does not offer easy answers. She offers honest companionship in grief, which is something far more valuable. The book found its audience quickly, because grief is universal and honest voices in the middle of it are rare. Nancy went on to write Hearing Jesus Speak Into Your Sorrow, What Grieving People Wish You Knew About What Really Helps, and a multi-volume Bible study series called Seeing Jesus in the Old Testament, among many others. She also co-founded respite retreats with her husband David, weekend gatherings specifically designed for couples who have experienced the death of a child. These retreats are not therapy sessions, though they are healing. They are spaces where couples can gather with others who understand, share their experiences, and rest in community. Nancy and David have hosted these retreats for years and have spoken about the profound impact they have seen in couples who arrive isolated and leave feeling less alone. Her podcast, Help Me Teach the Bible, is co-produced with the Gospel Coalition and has become one of the most respected resources for Bible teachers and pastors seeking to understand and communicate the Scriptures more effectively. Each episode features a conversation with a scholar or theologian focused on a specific book of the Bible, not devotional reflection, but genuine academic engagement made accessible. None of this is hidden. All of it is documented, publicly available, and consistent with everything Nancy has said about herself across 20-plus years of public ministry. Nancy Guthrie's story is not unique in the way it has been misread online. It is, unfortunately, part of a much larger pattern. We live in an information environment that rewards engagement above accuracy. Content that generates clicks, shares, and comments gets amplified. And content that generates those responses tends to be content that provokes emotion, particularly curiosity, suspense, and the feeling that something important is being withheld. Mystery-style framing does exactly that. It takes a real story, strips out the context, repackages it with rhetorical questions and dramatic pauses, and presents it as something unsolved when it is, in fact, fully understood by anyone willing to read a single book or watch a single interview. The problem is not malice, or at least not always. Sometimes it is genuine misunderstanding. Someone encounters fragments of Nancy's story, finds it compelling, and writes about it in a way that reflects their own confusion. That confusion then spreads because it looks like information even when it is actually the absence of information dressed up in confident language. The solution is not cynicism about everything you read online. The solution is discipline, the habit of following a story to its source before drawing conclusions. In Nancy's case, the sources are remarkably accessible. Her books are available everywhere. Her podcast is free. Her interviews are on YouTube and in print. The full picture is right there, waiting for anyone willing to look for it rather than settling for fragments. Let us bring this together clearly, because clarity is what this story has always deserved. Nancy Guthrie is a Christian author, speaker, and Bible teacher. She lost 2 children, a daughter named Hope and a son named Gabriel, to Zellweger syndrome, a rare genetic disorder. Those losses were devastating, fully documented, and openly discussed. Her response to those losses was to write, to speak, and to build a ministry aimed at helping other grieving people find their footing. There is no unsolved mystery surrounding her. There are no hidden facts being concealed. There are no alternative explanations that reframe the story in a darker or more complicated direction. What there is, instead, is a woman of remarkable resilience and candor who has done something very difficult, turned personal devastation into public service, and who has done it consistently, transparently, and faithfully for more than 2 decades. The confusion around her story is real, but it comes from the outside. It comes from the way online content sometimes distorts and sensationalizes in the pursuit of engagement. It does not come from anything Nancy herself has hidden or obscured. Once you understand that, the so-called mystery dissolves completely. What remains is something far more interesting and far more worth your time. The actual story of a real woman who chose honesty over silence and community over isolation when everything in her life could have justified the opposite. Here is the thing about mysteries, the real ones and the manufactured ones. Real mysteries exist because essential information is genuinely missing. Manufactured mysteries exist because someone chose to present available information as if it were missing. Nancy Guthrie's story is not a real mystery. The information has always been there. The books are on the shelves. The podcast is in your feed. The interviews are online. The story has been told fully, honestly, and repeatedly by the person who lived it. What this story actually is, beneath the manufactured confusion, is a lesson in how grief can become generosity. How loss, when it is not buried or denied, can become a foundation that supports other people who are in the middle of their own falling. That is not a mystery. That is something rarer and more valuable. That is someone choosing to be useful in the middle of the hardest thing they ever lived through. If this breakdown helped you see Nancy Guthrie's story more clearly, share it with someone who has been confused by the noise around it. And if you want to go deeper into stories that deserve more honest attention than they usually get, subscribe and stay with us. The next video is already queued up. And like this one, it starts with a question most people answer too quickly. Stay curious, stay patient, and never